The debris that comes off of the taillight, the fragments, what speed would they be going at the point of impact when they crack and are released from the taillight?
At the impact speed or less.
In order to penetrate the sweatshirt and cut the arm across, would the shards have to be going faster or slower than the arm?
They would have to be going faster. If they're moving at a common velocity with the arm relative to it, they would somehow have to accelerate with more speed to catch up and go beyond the arm, essentially.
Is that physically possible?
No.
You're simply the best.
Was the damage to the sweatshirt that you saw in this experiment consistent with the damage or defects that you saw in just the right arm, those 9 puncture holes on the right arm of the sweatshirt of John O'Keefe?
No, this is distinctly road rash. There's a clear distinction between the two.
You were asked a lot of questions about the difference in the weight of the arm. As you sit here, do you know whether his arm, John O'Keefe's right arm, if weighed by itself accurately, because pounds and apparently half pounds matter, if it weighed 11.8 pounds or if it weighed 9.4 pounds? Do you know?
I don't know, no.
In what way does that differentiation of 2.5 pounds or approximately 2.5 pounds, in what way does that make a difference in terms of your testing?
It doesn't, and that's part of the reason why we increase the speeds to almost 30 miles an hour to look at, again, when you're bringing that much more kinetic energy from the vehicle, that's going to overcome any mass that arm has. If it, like I said, if it's a pound difference, 2 pound difference, the momentum of that vehicle moving at 30 miles an hour versus 24 miles an hour, again, kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 times the mass times the velocity squared. So even if you go up a few miles per hour, you're exponentially increasing that amount of kinetic energy from the vehicle.
Let me ask it this way. Is the speed of the testing vehicle tethered in some way to the difference of that 2.5 pounds that Mr. Brennan was asking you about?
No, and again, as you saw throughout the PowerPoint, when that vehicle is coming in at 24 miles an hour, 29 miles an hour, at those speeds, that arm, when it makes contact, is going to get accelerated up to that velocity. It's just going to reach that common velocity. It's not going to, you're not going to somehow affect the vehicle speed due to that, you know, the fact that the arm weighing 10 pounds roughly, and you've got 6,000 pounds. It's not going to somehow scrub off speed of the vehicle.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Benigno. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a 6th-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor, and I am here breaking down the Karen Read case. And what a day it was. We got an entire day of one of my favorite people in the universe, Mr. Dan Wolfe. So much fun, isn't it? It's so much fun to see Dan. And I dreaded Hank's Cross. I dreaded it. I was dreading it. It was terrible. It was like going to the dentist on steroids. Every second of it was torture. And like I have said time and time again, and I stand by it, Hank Brennan deserves an award for being the most unlikable human being that the world has ever seen. I cannot imagine how a person could be more unlikable. And just while we're on the topic of unlikable, I was watching one of the chats. I don't know if it was Law and Crime. I don't know which one it was. But somebody, and thank you to that person, was counting the number of sustained objections by Judge Bev.
Do you have any understanding at that time of what the Commonwealth's theory of the case was when you began your initial analysis?
Sustained.
Did you have any indication of what the Massachusetts State Police theory of the case was based on the investigative reports that you had received?
Sustained.
Did you perform an accident reconstruction analysis to determine whether or not the damage to the Lexus, that taillight housing material, was consistent with an interaction with a pedestrian?
Yes.
Objection.
Sustained.
37 miles an hour, correct?
Sustained.
Saw some things in the media and was just wondering what was going on.
Sustained.
Were you still under contract with the other entity that hired you?
Sustained.
Tell me about that. When was that?
From what I recall, it was sometime in March, and we were trying to figure out.
Sustained. Next question, please.
Did I ask you if you were available to be retained by the defense?
Sustained.
May we approach opinions and conclusions? Did you incorporate them?
Sustained is to the front.
Did you agree ultimately with Dr. Welcher's opinions and conclusions?
Sustained.
You certainly were aware of what his opinions and conclusions were, correct?
The form, Mr. Jackson, on that one.
What is a static test?
So I'm sustaining that. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson. And I'm going to strike that.
It's like pivoting your arm a little bit, right?
Sustained.
Do you see that Dr. Welcher appears to be wearing an orange T-shirt?
Sustained.
Moves to the same speed as the object obstructed.
So that's sustained. Just ask him a simple question, let him answer.
At least my understanding of reviewing Dr. Welcher's work, it appeared to be that his hypothesis.
Sustained. Next question.
Sure. Did you see whether or not Dr. Welcher followed this scientific method as you're explaining it to the jury?
Sustained.
Or what opinions or conclusions did you come to about the scientific method, if any, that Dr. Welcher did or did not undertake?
Sustained.
Did he undertake the scientific method as you know it?
Right, so that's sustained.
Again, from reviewing Dr. Welcher's report, he indicated.
That's sustained. I'm going to see you at sidebar.
In Dr. Welcher's report.
Sustained is to that form, Mr. Jackson.
Did you see this undertaken anywhere else?
Sustained there.
Did you see any force dynamics testing?
That's leading, so you can
Sure.
get to it without that.
Was your testing directed toward determining whether or not the scenario proposed in Dr. Welcher's report was consistent or inconsistent with what you would find, ultimately?
The objection sustained.
Was your testing specifically designed to determine whether the damage to Miss Reed's vehicle, her Lexus, was consistent with the scenario that was proposed by Dr. Welcher?
That's sustained too.
Dr. Welcher indicated that the arm contacted the taillight, but there was no analysis or testing to determine what's the expected outcome of that. What's the damage to the taillight?
So you answered the first question. I'm striking that second part. Ask another question.
What was your understanding of Dr. Welcher's hypothesis?
That's sustained.
Did you have an understanding of Dr. Welcher's hypothesis?
That's sustained too.
49 sustained objections. 49. 49 by noon. And in case you are keeping track at home, that is a perfect score by Hank Brennan. A perfect score. And what I find to be the most interesting about that perfect score, it just so happened to be when Dan Wolfe is testifying. Because despite the fact that there was no evidence whatsoever of any suspicious or ill-intended or nefarious interaction between the defense and ARCCA, and very clearly, okay, if you have half a brain in your head, Dan Wolfe, Dr. Rentschler, these guys actually have integrity. And maybe that's just such an unimaginable concept to somebody like Beverly Cannoni and Hank Brennan and Adam Lally that they can't imagine that. So they have no choice but to assume that they're lying, or that those 100, text messages about their flight arrangements and when they're coming and times and dates and all of that, that must be nefarious. They're hiding something. They use Signal one time. Oh my God. And in the meantime, how many times throughout this trial have we heard about very sus interactions between Hank Brennan and every single witness in this case. And oh, yeah, there's that little inconvenient fact about the $400,000 that the Commonwealth paid Aperture to play with paint. And in case you thought that you were delusional, and maybe somewhere in that report by Welcher, there was science, there was some remnants of reality, of objectivity, of numbers and facts and data and the scientific method, Dan Wolfe does a nice job, despite Bev's ever-present attempts to stifle it. Thanks to Dan Wolfe, we get that very clearly.
Did you look for testing in Dr. Welcher's evaluation, all of his data?
Yes.
Did you find any?
No.
Other than the static blue paint test?
That was the only test, correct. I'm not aware of him making any type of force calculations or measuring accelerations or anything of that nature, no.
Did Dr. Welcher conduct any testing to determine whether the damage to Miss Reed's Lexus was consistent with the striking of an arm of a pedestrian?
I'm not aware of any impact testing that he did, no.
Did Dr. Welcher conduct any testing to determine the forces necessary to cause the damage to the taillight of Miss Reed's vehicle?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Did Dr. Welcher conduct any testing to determine the forces necessary to cause the injuries to John O'Keefe's arm?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Going back to the calculations previously, the delta V, the acceleration, the force calculations that you described to the jury, did you see anywhere in any of Dr. Welcher's reports or his data that he undertook those core calculations?
No. I could not find anywhere in it a specified speed or even a range of speeds.
Did Dr. Welcher provide any opinion at all as it relates to the post-impact trajectory or movement, if you will, of John O'Keefe's mass or his body subsequent to the alleged conduct?
No, not that I'm aware of.
This killed me. If I was in that room, I would have been losing my mind. I don't know if I would have been able to keep it together. I really, really don't. I really don't. If I was a juror, I would have just been like, like freaking out, so upset, so angry, so unable to contain myself, because how dare this man, after what his joke, his $400,000 joke of an accident reconstructionist team, let's be honest, who don't even deserve that title, because all they really are, basically, if any one of us, let's just pick 6 of us, get us all together, no matter what our backgrounds are, we obviously don't need degrees, we could have absolutely done the testing that Judge Welcher did, and we could then have charged the Commonwealth $400,000. And honestly, I think if myself and randomly I selected 4 people who are listening to this, we could have done a much better job, a much better job. And then he has the audacity to try to use science and the confirmation bias against Dan Wolfe? Like, just think about that. Think about that as you watch this.
The first test you're going to see is me just walking backwards, or actually sideways, into the Lexus. What I've done is I've painted the Lexus right rear tail light and I have, with my arm out, see what the damage pattern looks like, or basically where someone of Mr. O'Keefe's height's arm would contact the rear tail light.
Did Dr. Welcher appear to be wearing similar clothing as John O'Keefe was wearing on January 29th, 2022?
Yes.
Was there any significance or purpose for that, in your opinion?
In this test, no.
Did you identify any limitations with regard to this sort of testing undertaken by Dr. Welcher?
Well, it's very basic in that the only thing that this demonstrates is that you can get your right arm to align with the taillight. Beyond that, it doesn't tell you anything with respect to what happens to the arm when it makes contact with the taillight, right? What's the motion of the arm? What's the damage to the taillight? What's the acceleration of the arm? What's the forces of the arm? So it doesn't answer any of those other questions. The only question it answers is, does the arm align with the taillight?
Can only a 6'1" person align their arm with the taillight?
No, the arm is adjustable, so certainly people of different heights could also meet that alignment as well.
400,000 taxpayer dollars for that absolute disgrace. Disgrace! Based on information that, let's be honest, is sus at best. Like, what? And then you have the nerve, you have the audacity to get up there and smear Dan Wolfe. And not only that, you try to imply that he's biased because his wife is a supporter of Karen Reed. If your husband is Dan Wolfe, would you support him? If the defense team, if those are the people that he was supporting, wouldn't you be more likely to support that side? Particularly because the Commonwealth had no interest in ARCCA, wanted nothing to do with them. Since the very first day that we were introduced to Mr. Hank Brennan, the day that he promised us he was going to be fair to the defense and to Karen Reed.
Before we head to a break, we have some breaking news to share with you out of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where a new prosecutor will now be spearheading the Karen Reed retrial.
Norfolk District Attorney Michael Morrissey announced today that he has tapped defense attorney Hank Brennan, that's right, you heard it, defense attorney Hank Brennan, as a special assistant DA, calling him a highly respected and skilled former prosecutor.
Brennan said this in a statement that he assumes full responsibility and all obligations for prosecuting this case and will do so meticulously, ethically, and zealously without compromise.
Defendant Karen Reed stood trial earlier this year for the second-degree murder of her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe.
Is when those who know Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan say he brings his best.
Hank is so successful because he's unflappable.
J.W. Carney Jr. has seen a lot during his time as a lawyer, including working with Brennan when both represented James Whitey Bulger more than a decade ago.
Hank is calm. He doesn't yell at people. He doesn't try to trick people.
In this case, you provided reports recently?
Yes.
When did you provide your report? Was it April 6th?
April 6th?
Or was it May 6th?
I think it's May 7th,
May 7th.
if I'm not mistaken.
So you provided a report May 7th, yes?
Correct.
And do you know when this trial started?
Early April?
You provided your PowerPoint. When did you provide your PowerPoint?
I think it would have been Thursday of this week.
Well, it wasn't last night.
Sorry, maybe Wednesday. Wednesday or Thursday.
Wednesday. Is that fair?
Yes.
In looking at pedestrian accidents, it's important to try, if you can, understand the exact positioning of the body, isn't it?
If a collision occurred, yes.
And if a collision occurred, you can't always identify the exact position of the body, can you?
No, oftentimes it can be very difficult, yes.
You would want to know if it is a collision between a car and a pedestrian, whether the person was fully impacted or it was a clipping type incident. Wouldn't you want to know that if you could?
That would certainly affect the trajectory, yes.
And you would want to know, if you could, the body posture, whether the person was standing up straight or crouching.
If a collision occurred, yes.
Whether they were turning or standing straight or they had their arm out. That's helpful information, isn't it?
It can be, but when we're talking about how quickly this impact duration is, right? If you recall back to the PowerPoint, right, we're talking about a 10 millisecond window. So however the body is positioned at contact, that's how it's positioned. It's not going to be able to have any significant movement or change in orientation in that 10 millisecond window.
The position of the body can change the trajectory of the person who's hit, can it?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Positioning of the body, the way they're positioned, that can change the trajectory if they're hit after they're hit, can it?
It can, yes.
Whether they're moving towards the vehicle or away from it could affect the trajectory, couldn't it?
If they have some relative velocity, yeah.
Trying to determine the point of impact when you're looking at a scene, it's important when you do trajectory studies to know where the point of impact is, isn't it?
If you're going to utilize studies that look at projection of pedestrians when you're contacted at the center of gravity and you get projected some distance, you can rely on those studies, but you have to have an understanding of where the point of impact is and where the point of rest is.
If you don't have the point of impact, if you don't know the point of impact, you don't know the exact body position, that creates variables in your studies, doesn't it?
Well, again, talking about those studies, they're not applicable when you are contacting, for instance, just a limb or you don't have a center of gravity hit. Those when you're talking about how far will a pedestrian get projected, if it's like a forward projection or what's known as like a wrap projection where the pedestrian wraps onto the hood and then becomes decoupled, those studies are applicable there. But when you're talking about where there's minimal overlap between the body and the center of gravity, then you can't utilize those studies.
So you would not want to know where the point of impact is?
In this particular case, no, I don't think it would be helpful.
You would not want to know the body position?
I don't think that it would be helpful in determining, because again, we have to start with, is it consistent with a collision?
So you would not want to know the body position. That's what you're telling us. You don't want to know that.
Well, if the evidence indicates that the contact is inconsistent, then that's kind of where the reconstruction stops. You can't go to a point of impact and a point of rest if there was no contact.
So you don't want to know the body position.
Objection. Can you answer that?
I don't understand his question, Your Honor.
When you're doing studies, you don't want to know the body position?
Objection. Can you answer that, Dr. Wolfe?
Again, it depends on the type of impact. For the alleged contact in this case, you can't rely on those studies about impact location and point of rest. They're not applicable to this.
I'm talking about studies. As far as data, information, you as the person doing tests, would you want to know the body positioning?
Objection. This is 5 times.
And this time we'll get an answer, and that'll be it.
We've got an answer every single time.
Can you answer that, Dr. Wolfe?
I feel like I've answered it the best I can, Your Honor.
Okay, next question.
You don't like that question?
I think our objective was to determine whether or not the damage was consistent with an interaction with Mr. John O'Keefe, and could there be another mechanism to cause the tail blight to break?
Is there a reason why you were backing off that opinion on direct examination today?
Objection.
Sustained.
You weren't fully embracing that theory today, were you?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
I don't know if I agree with that.
The Bolger trial bringing with it a crush of media.
I'm very proud of our team.
The Reed case coming with similar interests.
I know Hank was delighted to handle this case. He had watched it a little bit, like we all did. And so Hank is coming up with ways that he will cross-examine witnesses that will really unravel their stories if they're lying.
But I care that it's unfair, imbalanced, and hidden.
Brennan's attention to detail was on display last week. Brennan using a pretrial motion hearing to call into question the use of accident reconstruction experts by Karen Reed's defense.
The Commonwealth just provided the court with information that causes me grave concern.
leading the judge to halt the hearing. It all an example, Carney says, of Brennan's approach to this case and every case he handles.
Hank's attention to detail will be a great help to him during this trial, because he will not only have read every document and thought about every document, but responded to defense claims in a very powerful way.
Karen Reed's first trial lasted some 9 weeks. Prosecutors calling 68 different witnesses. Not so on the prosecution side this second time around. According to Carney, he says Brennan's style is more direct. He only calls the witnesses he needs to help explain and state his case.
This is me telling you not to forget to hit the like button so that we can pass this along and make sure more people find out about how horribly corrupt and evil the Commonwealth of Massachusetts actually is. So don't forget to hit the like button. Okay, so we're going to watch some of this together. I'm going to try to temper my reactions. And yes, it's a little bit sped up, because I have a really hard time listening to Hank Brennan in real time. So I apologize if you don't like that it's at a faster speed. But between his voice and I don't want to be here for the rest of my life, it makes life easier.
Exhibit 216.
Thank you.
Here we go.
All right, Mr. Brennan.
Good afternoon, Dr. Wolfe.
Good afternoon.
When you testified in direct, you shared with the jury some of the work that ARCCA does. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you had mentioned a couple interesting things, that there had been some work with the Department of Defense.
Correct, yes.
The work with the Department of Defense, was that during your time or before you got there?
That would have been prior to my employment, yes.
So when you were telling them about working with the Department of Defense, that really had nothing to do with you. That was ARCCA before you began working there.
ARCCA as a whole, yes, the work that we do, yes.
Not you.
As I said, I wasn't involved specifically in that project, no.
And you mentioned that you did some stuff, or the company does some things for the NHL?
Yes.
You didn't tell us much more about what you do. There's other things that ARCCA does as far as clients, right?
Certainly.
Did you share with us that you work for lawyers and law firms?
Yes, we do.
And you do litigation, insurance companies?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any reason why you highlighted the Department of Defense that you don't do, and the NHL, but didn't share the rest of the stuff with us?
That's just some of the prominent clients that we have.
I see. You provided us a CV, didn't you?
Yes.
And that's like a resume, tells us a little bit about your education experience. You get to highlight some of the things, your accomplishments.
Yes.
You shared with us you've been the director of accident reconstruction at this company, ARCCA, since 2017?
No, not since I started.
You started with ARCCA in 2017?
Correct, yes.
When did you become the director of accident reconstruction?
I think that would have been in January of 2024, so about a year and a half.
About a year and a half ago?
Yes.
And you received your certification from ACDAR?
Yes.
Did you pass the test on both parts first time?
I don't recall if I think it was I had to retake, I think, the practical section in the afternoon.
Well, you would recall something like that, wouldn't you? Did you pass both parts on the first try?
Like I said, I think it was the second part I had to retake.
Well, this is a pretty important test, isn't it?
Not really.
It's your certification.
It is, but much of the concepts that are covered in it are very elementary.
Well, not so elementary. You had a hard time with part of it, didn't you?
Well, with respect to the portion that I had to retake, it's a practical exam where you have to reconstruct an accident. You have to determine approach angles, departure angles, and it can be very sensitive to those inputs. And unfortunately, if you mess up one of your first angles and you carry out that calculation, then the whole problem is graded wrong, even if you did all of the math correct.
So we understand there's a multiple choice question part that's the easier part, correct?
I don't know if it's easier, but there is a multiple choice part.
There's a more practical part where you actually have to go out in the field and do assessments, kind of like the things that you did today.
You don't go out into the field, no.
And, when did you first take that second part that you did test?
I don't recall.
You don't remember when you took the test?
No, I don't.
Suffice to say, you took it again.
Correct.
And ultimately, you passed both sections of that test?
Yes.
In your CV, you list your schooling, and you list your degrees, don't you?
Yes.
You mentioned some of the things that you focused on in your academic experience, don't you?
Yes.
And you have publications.
Correct.
Recently, you did a publication regarding vehicle control history on Toyotas.
Correct.
Vehicle control history is data that is stored in a vehicle,
Yes.
and Toyota owns Lexus, correct?
Correct.
So you have familiarity with vehicle control history. In fact, you have a publication on it.
Yes.
In your entire resume, you only mentioned pedestrian collisions, or that you're involved in pedestrian-type events 3 times. Is there anything specific in your resume or your publications that show a published accomplishment, for example, in pedestrian collisions? Do you have any publications that have been peer-reviewed or published in that area?
No, I don't have any publications in pedestrians.
You write or you note areas of specialty, and you list a bunch: accident reconstruction, human factors, EDR, commercial vehicle, HVEDR, pedestrian bicycle accidents, nighttime visibility, and a number of others, correct?
Correct.
Is there anywhere in your resume that notes particular classes that you've attended and completed regarding pedestrian collisions?
No, I haven't taken any classes in that.
Can we talk about how absurd this is? Just think. Like the audacity of this piece of garbage human being. Everything he does is smoke and mirrors. You are not the defense. You're supposed to be putting on a legitimate case. And as much as Adam Lally is the scum of the earth, at least he just laid it all out there. And I have to tell you, in hindsight, I think that strategy was probably the better call. Why? Because in the jury's mind, and even if this is a subtle implication, it's just a subtle implication, but it's so strong and so powerful. If I'm on that jury and I am so overwhelmed with 68 witnesses for the prosecution, I can't possibly remember even a quarter of all of the information that Adam Lally put in front of me, right? But he put them in front of me. He put in front of me Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, Michael Proctor. He put all of the dirty laundry for the Commonwealth in front of everybody. So in my mind, if I'm sitting in that jury, what is the subtle implication? The subtle implication is this guy wouldn't put them in front of me unless they were credible. This guy's not hiding anything. But no, not Hank Brennan. And according to Mr. Whitey Bulger buddy of Hank's, oh, well, that's not Hank's style. He streamlines. No. That's not what he's doing. What he's doing is cherry picking the narrative that he wants the jury to hear and ignoring systematically and quite deliberately everything else, and then using smoke and mirrors and, quite frankly, total bull to try to obfuscate the truth. And I got to tell you, that's the way it appears to me. This man is not likable. And you would think, as an attorney, you would just think that that would be an important awareness to have. I am not a likable human being, so maybe, especially if I'm going to play on the side of the Commonwealth, I should try to be likable. I should try not to make myself seem like the biggest piece of shit in the world who's trying to tear down a man who has more integrity in his left pinky than Hank Brennan will ever see in his lifetime. And I just have to hope and pray that the jury can see it. The jury can see through all of this garbage. Like, how in God's name can you compare or even have the nerve to compare Dan Wolfe with Shannon Burgess? Or even, let's be honest, Dr. Welcher, who's a scam artist. Dr. Welcher is a scam artist. ARCCA cost $50,000 for 2 men who collectively have more knowledge, integrity, and intellectual superiority over anyone at Aperture because they are a fraudulent group of people. And Hank Brennan has the audacity to go after Dan Wolfe for his resume. Are you fucking kidding me? Oh, God, I just have to pray. Just pray. You just pray that the jury is not as dumb as Hank Brennan thinks that they are, because he really thinks that people are just stupid. Clearly does not have a high opinion of humanity, because he really must believe that they are brain dead to buy this.
You haven't taken any classes on pedestrian collisions?
No.
Have you ever taught?
Haven't taken classes. He's doing the research. Like, he's doing the research. The guy's a physicist. Like, give me a break. I can't stand it. It's so frustrating. It's just all lying. Garbage.
Regarding pedestrian collisions?
No.
Have you ever been a speaker in a presentation about pedestrian collisions?
Does that matter?
Yes.
Okay. Is that listed in your resume?
I don't list lectures or presentations, no.
I don't try to inflate my resume. I don't try to make myself seem more important than I really am, Mr. Hank Brennan. Unlike your accident reconstruction team, your pay-to-play accident reconstruction team, who cost $400,000 to basically obfuscate the truth, change their data so that it aligns with Ian Whiffin's report. Are you kidding?
You were asked questions about your involvement in this case. Yes?
Yes.
And you had shared with us that you, at the beginning, were working for a separate party or a third party, you said?
Yes, another agency.
Another agency. And at some point, you came into court and testified last year.
Yes.
And during the time before you came in and testified, you weren't wholly independent of the defense, were you?
Well, certainly before all of our testing, at the point at which we did all of our testing, report, and analysis, as I mentioned on direct, I didn't know the Commonwealth or the defense in this case.
My question, more precisely, before you testified, before you came into court and gave your testimony, you weren't totally independent from the defense, were you?
No, I mean, I had to communicate with them to be able to determine when to appear for testimony.
So you were communicating with them, yes?
Yes.
And in fact, some of the time that you spent, ARCCA actually billed the defense for, and they paid that bill, didn't they?
Eventually after the trial, yes.
During that time, you know what a sequestration order is, don't you?
Yes.
Do you think that you're under a sequestration order today?
Yes.
Did you talk to anybody about any of the prior testimony in this case before today?
No.
How'd you get here today?
How did I get here today? I took a car ride over from the hotel.
Who drove you?
It was a driver. I don't know his name.
Who set up the car?
It would have been someone on the defense team.
Was it like a window, like a limo?
It was an SUV.
Was there anybody from the defense with you on the ride over?
There were 3 young ladies in the back seat. I think they might have been interns, and Mr. Wolke.
And who?
Mr. Wolke, I think is it pronounced? Am I saying it wrong?
Have you discussed anything about this case before your testimony today as far as the trial?
Before today?
Yes. Have you discussed anybody's testimony in this case?
Nobody's testimony, no.
That was different last year, though, because before you testified last year, you did have discussions about testimony, didn't you?
Not with the Commonwealth or the defense, no.
But I'm asking, though, you did have discussions about testimony before you testified last year, right?
Correct, yes.
And you know what a sequestration order is, don't you?
Yes.
After you testified last year, the court ordered you to provide all of your text messages, all your communications with the defense, didn't they?
Yes, earlier this year.
And when you were ordered to provide all of the actual verbatim communications with the defense, did you provide those communications?
Yes, all of the records that I had at the time I provided.
Well, not the records. You know what I'm getting at. Did you provide the communications?
I provided everything I had in my possession, sir.
A text message isn't just a time and date. It's actually substance when you text somebody, isn't there?
Correct.
And when you texted, how many texts do you think you had with the defense?
From what I recall, I think it was around 50 texts that I sent.
It wasn't 100, I think it was 50?
Well, I think it was around 100 total in terms of back and forth, but it was, I think, 50 that I sent.
And during those texts, communications, conversations, correct?
About logistics, yes.
Did you provide the content of those text messages when you were ordered to by the court?
Well, those text messages spanned from, I guess it would have been April or so of 2024 through May to June of 2024. Ultimately, I think I received the court's order in May of this year, April of this year. So it was a year after the fact, and I had already deleted the text at that point.
How many of those text messages did you delete?
I just swiped the conversation, so it would have been the whole conversation.
Not how you did it. How many of those 100 or so text messages did you delete, sir?
It would have been the whole text chain. I didn't individually delete them. It just, when you swipe, it just deletes the text chain.
After you deleted them, did you go into the recently deleted and then delete them so they were unavailable?
I don't recall doing that.
Well, you were asked to search your records for the text messages. Did you do a thorough search to see if you still had them or whether you had destroyed them all?
I checked my phone, and I also checked with my phone carrier.
So do you know if they were still under the recently deleted part of your phone, or did you go and take that extra step and totally destroy them?
From what I recall, I did not find any of the text messages, no.
Listen to this garbage. It's just such garbage. And Hank Brennan knows it's garbage. He knows it's garbage. Right? I mean, that's the thing. It's just total garbage. And by the way, can you imagine what the conversations between Aperture and Hank Brennan looked like? I mean, it's just garbage. It's just total lies. We got witnesses lying. You got Shannon Burgess lying outright about the fact that Hank Brennan emailed him and requested that he update his report to try to match Ian Whiffin's testimony. It's just garbage. But of course, it's projection, right? Because the way that humans think, we assume that other people are doing what we're doing. So Hank Brennan is lying and cheating and stealing and doing everything he can to try to win. And so he assumes that's what the defense is doing. But the problem is that the defense is actually using high character human beings. And Hank Brennan is not. Hank Brennan is using taxpayer dollars to pay the two just absolute pay-to-play witnesses that he could find to say whatever he wanted. And that's what he paid for. You say what I want. These guys have nothing to do with the defense. Their opinions predated Karen Reed. And he's trying to make the jury here, again, smoke and mirrors, think that an insurance company hired him, and he knows that the defense can't do anything about it. I mean, think about how corrupt that is. He knows the defense cannot defend themselves. They can't say a law enforcement agency hired him. And he knew that when he asked this question about the Defense Department, it moves everything away from people thinking about it being a law enforcement agency. So I just have to pray that somebody on that jury has seen the signs that say ARCCA was hired by the feds. Because there are people, thank God for you, whoever you are, I hope you're listening, thank you very much, walking around Canton, Massachusetts with very large signs that say exactly that to try to help the jury along in this case. In fact, I should start relabeling every video I have that says ARCCA was paid by the feds. ARCCA was hired by the feds. It's just disgusting. It's just so disgusting. Could you imagine, by the way, if the defense was pulling this crap? How quickly this would be objected to and sustained? Seriously, think about it. How quickly would this line of questioning have been sustained by Miss Judge piece of garbage Beverly Cannoni? She's just, this woman is just like a horrible, horrible, horrible human being. And so is Hank Brennan. These are bad people. This is a bad guy. This is what you're showing the world, by the way. This is your display. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? And all we can do is start praying now that Karen Reed is exonerated, because that, on top of the corruption that these two have displayed, that's just so blatant, so in our face. Judge Bev is passing notes to Hank Brennan. They're doing inside signaling. She's telling him when to object in court. If I'm a juror and I eventually come away from this case and I see that, I would be like filing off reports. I would be reporting these two to everybody I could think of. This is a disgrace. It's disgusting. It is disgusting. These people are disgusting human beings.
Is there any reason why you deleted all of your text communications with the defense?
Well, it's something that I routinely do. I work with attorneys and clients all the time, whether it's appearing for trial or inspections, and I don't have a habit of keeping a text chain that talks about logistics and things. It's just I routinely delete them after that communication is over with, and certainly after the prior proceeding, once it had concluded, there was no reason for me to preserve those.
Okay. And so, at some point, you switched from text messages to another form of communication, didn't you?
Yes, earlier this year.
Tell us a little bit about this new form of communication, not text messages.
So Mr. Jackson had indicated that he and his defense team utilize an application known as Signal for their communications amongst their defense team. Ultimately asked if I would also use that application to communicate, which I agreed to.
Is Signal an encrypted app?
It's a secure encrypted app, yes.
It doesn't leave any records, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Well, you have it. You're using it. Do you have any records from your Signal use?
I'm going to allow that.
Do you have any records from your
Of
Signal
course
use?
you are.
I do not, no.
So you know full well that Signal is an encrypted app, leaves no record.
There may be a setting that you can change. I just know that the way that it was set up, there was no record.
Well, who set yours up to have no record?
I don't know. I think it was default.
Have you ever checked your Signal app to see if you have any record of your communications pursuant to that court order?
Well, I don't have the application anymore, but at the time I did check the application.
Out of all these clients that you've had, how many times or how many clients would you use Signal with?
This was the first time.
Have you used it since with other clients?
Not yet, no.
Before you testified...
And also, by the way, just for fun, let's go back, just for fun. We'll only do this for a minute, but let's go back and let's just take a quick look and remember what Welcher's cross-examination was like, shall we?
No, that's usually the last question.
Oh, so for you...
So hold on a second.
Okay, I'm
Generally,
sorry.
what you want to do is gather data. You want to know what injuries there are, what evidence there is, like, for example, on the vehicles. And then the very last thing you want to know or define is, given all that information, how did it happen? So that's the end.
I think you may have misunderstood my question, sir. I wasn't talking about the method or the process. I was talking about when you get to answering questions, whenever that is in the process. Isn't one of the questions, and maybe one of the first questions, how did this happen?
No, that's not one of the first questions. One of the first questions is, where's the damage? What are the injuries? What's the evidence? What black box or text stream data do we have? What physical evidence was at the scene? So that is certainly not one. It is a question, but that question is at or near the end.
Isn't every one of the questions that you just mentioned part of the data gathering?
Correct, but when you're gathering data, you're always asking yourself questions along the way, like, what is this? Where did it come from?
But you would agree that for you at least some point, it's how did this happen, correct?
Yes.
And don't you ask that question to come up with hypotheses?
I generally have many working hypotheses as I'm working on the case, and then as the evidence comes in, I'm applying that to my hypotheses and either accepting or rejecting the hypotheses based upon the factual information.
Sir, how then is it just a matter of logic or a syllogism? If you don't ask the question, how did this happen, until the end, how do you then not get your hypotheses up front when, under the scientific method, you should be having different hypotheses up front? How is it that you ask the how did it happen at the end and not go through hypotheses in the beginning? Can you help me with that logic?
Sure, I guess I misunderstood. Like, I was trying to give you an answer to how it happened. So when you're answering how it happened, or you want to be able to answer that question, you want to make sure you've looked at the totality of the data, accepted, rejected, things as they came along, to be able to answer that final question, how did it happen?
Okay. Is that enough, or should we keep going? Or we already had enough, had plenty of Dr. Welcher. Somebody asked me, I thought this was a really interesting question. Somebody had asked me in a live, is this guy a narcissist? And it's an interesting question. At the time, I said, I just think he's a pay to play guy. I think he's going to tell you whatever it is that he was paid to tell you. So it's very difficult to assess what kind of personality he is based on how argumentative he was, because he's just doing what he thinks he's supposed to be doing. He's doing what he thinks he's been paid to do, right? So it's hard to say. To me, he's actually kind of people pleasing. And you don't see people pleasing when you're dealing with narcissism, right? You deal with narcissism, you have exactly the opposite. He's not trying to please the defense. He's trying to please the people who paid him $400,000. So in his head, the entire conversation, it's how do I try to make the Commonwealth look good? How do I defend against the people who are trying to say that my data or my process is wrong, because that's what they're supposed to do, right? You know what I'm saying? So in other words, that's his job. In his mind, his job is to deflect questions and try to make the defense look bad. So it's hard for me to say that that's a narcissistic position, because that is what he was paid $400,000 to do, right? And to me, he actually seems like he's like Mr. Cool Guy, like he's trying to be the cool guy, like that, you know, speaks to the jury. And like, I just don't know that I see the kind of arrogance that you saw. Okay, by comparison, I will tell you who I absolutely would call a narcissist in this trial.
Started to do it a little bit on direct. Good day for you.
I wake up at 4:15 in the morning. I go to my center. I set up patients with frames for their either radiosurgical procedures or stereotactic craniotomies. I go home. I make cappuccino for my wife at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then I get back to work at 6:30 and move on. I have patients that I'm operating on, and I have patients that I'm seeing through the day.
And what type of patients and what type of work? Just in a typical day. What are you doing? What type of patients and what do you do?
It varies. I mean, I see patients with brain tumors. I see patients with hydrocephalus, which is water in their brain. I see pediatric brain tumors. I see subacute and chronic subdural hematomas, post-traumatic. I see patients with strokes that are being misdiagnosed. I see patients.
You see what I'm saying? So right off the bat, this man is telling us what a wonderful person he is, and is going to great lengths to prove just how smart he is and that he's smarter than everybody else. He even includes that he's working with people who have been misdiagnosed. And he's a do-gooder. He helps children. He goes and he brings his wife her cappuccino every morning, right? That is a narcissist. But let's keep going. As much as I actually appreciate narcissists, I do actually, believe it or not, work with a fair amount of narcissism, generally speaking. And I'm not someone who has an inherent trigger to narcissism, but I certainly have a very, very acute radar for it.
With cancer, metastatic disease. I used to see patients with cervical problems. I stopped doing that 2 years ago. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to tell you.
No, that's great. And is that typical day, typical of the type of days you've had for the past month, past few years? Is it generally, without specifics, is it generally?
Correct.
So, none of your typical days, none of the past typical months have involved forensic pathology, have they? You haven't acted as a forensic pathologist in...
I am, if you could have asked that question, very straightforward. I am not a forensic pathologist. I'm a brain surgeon.
Right. And you don't perform autopsies, correct, sir? You're a brain surgeon.
Correct. In other words, I see more brains than the forensic pathologist.
You see what I'm saying? You see what I mean? This is narcissism, ladies and gentlemen. This is it. This is a beautiful display And you can see this guy is just not going to leave his little world to come into yours. So when we are dealing with narcissism, what you're going to see are people who project their center out. You are only in their world if they want you to be. They don't consider the world around them other than to serve the needs that they have, the interests that they have. You just don't exist otherwise. And while there can be a kind of what appears to be like a people-pleasing component to that, because they're charismatic and they do seek validation on some very sort of inherent level. It's very intuitive for them. It's not conscious. It's just they have this air, and you're either in their universe or you don't exist to them. That does not feel the same to me as Dr. Welcher.
Right. And is it correct to say that the brains that you see are of living people?
Correct.
Okay. So what I'd like...
Okay, so there you go. If that doesn't say it, I'm not sure how else to communicate it to you. One other thing I just want to point out here, I want you to look at the position. So pay attention here as we're going to scan this room, where Hank Brennan, Adam Lally, where they are in relationship to the judge. Just pay attention to that.
And is that typical day, typical of the type of days you've had for the past month, past few years? Is it generally, without specifics, is it generally?
Correct.
Okay. Note that right here. No, right here, you have Hank Brennan sitting directly in front of the judge. Just notice that. Directly in front. You see it? All she has to do is look straight ahead, and she's looking right at Hank Brennan. Right at him. And I also want you to note, if I had a note in my hand and I just reached forward, who are the potential people that note might go to? Just who might they go to? Now, particularly if the court reporter doesn't flinch, doesn't move, makes no indication whatsoever that she's the one that note is going to.
Last time. Or should I say when you testified at the last proceeding, kind of like today, you attempted to portray yourself as totally independent, didn't you?
Sustain enough.
When you testified at the prior proceeding, did you attempt to portray yourself as totally independent?
Yes.
Is that the same question?
The truth is...
I'm sorry, wait a minute. Didn't he just ask the same question twice?
Before you testified, you were communicating with the defense and attempting the best you could to assist their cause, weren't you?
I wouldn't characterize it that way.
So before you testified, you wrote out questions that you thought could help, that you should be asked when you testified, correct?
So something I routinely do before testifying is prepare an outline of topics and questions that would best help be able to get out my opinions and the analysis I undertook, ultimately so that you all have an understanding of what I did.
So I'm asking you a question. You gave the explanation, but you're skipping over the answer to my question. So I'll ask you again. Before you testified, did you write out a list of questions that you wanted to be asked?
Yes.
And when you listed out the questions, you also listed out the answers, didn't you?
A general response. It wouldn't be verbatim to that.
I didn't say verbatim, but you listed out the answers to each and every one of the questions that you had prepared.
Yes.
So for every question, there's an answer that you provided so that you could follow a script, so to speak, yes?
I wouldn't characterize it as a script.
One of the questions asks, so not being able to inspect vehicles is something that is not uncommon in your line of work? And your answer, absolutely not. Remember writing that out?
Yes.
Then you put a footnote, a comment. And you said, not sure if you want to put this somewhere in direct examination. I have a feeling they are going to argue I didn't personally inspect the vehicles. I had enough information from the material I reviewed, so it wasn't necessary. Need to show the jury it doesn't matter in this case. Did you write that?
Yes.
When you're talking about they, I have a feeling they are going to argue I didn't personally inspect the vehicle. Who's they?
That'd be the Commonwealth.
And so when you were writing out these questions as is your routine with the answers, is this the mark of independence to you?
Well, I think, again, whether the Commonwealth asked me that question or the defense asked me that question, my response would be the same. It wouldn't change depending on who called me to testify. There are a number of cases, by the time I get involved, the evidence is gone from the roadway, the vehicle is gone. So it's certainly not necessary to inspect a vehicle. And I wanted the jury to have an understanding that because I didn't physically inspect the vehicle, it didn't affect my analysis in the case.
So you think that showed independence?
Yes.
Then you also had another question. Would it be fair to say that because you do a lot of nighttime visibility work, your cases frequently involve pedestrians? Remember that?
Yes.
And you said, yes, unfortunately, there is a direct correlation between time of day and pedestrian fatalities. Is that true?
Correct, yes.
And do they happen more often in the day or at night?
More often at night, yes.
Statistically speaking, by the way, this case involves nighttime, doesn't it?
Correct.
Statistically speaking, most of pedestrian fatalities occur during the evening and night hours.
Like any of this matters.
My specialty in the area of lighting and human factors results in a lot of my cases involving pedestrians. Did you write that?
Yes.
In fact, you testified, you shared that with the jury, didn't you?
Correct. I've testified to that twice last year as well as this year.
And in the notes that you wrote, when you shared it last year and this year, was it an important point to the jury?
I think so, because it helped gave them an understanding, I think, of my background in lighting and human factors. And as I mentioned earlier today, there's a direct correlation between time of day and pedestrian impacts, right? So my specialty in lighting and human factors results in me seeing many, many different types of pedestrian impacts.
I just want to also point another thing out about this. If you did not hear piece of garbage Hank Brennan's voice asking this question, you could come in at any point in this testimony and have no idea whether he was answering a question that was from Alan Jackson or from Hank Brennan. No, there's no difference, right? There's no obstruction. He's just answering questions. And I think having that voir dire might have actually really helped him because it prepared him for this assault from Hank Brennan. So he's not as shook. During the voir dire, he seemed a little bit more rattled. Here, he just seems calm. He seems like he gets a little flushed maybe once or twice, but he just seems to answer the questions. And if I'm a juror, this guy's right in front of me. I'm not watching through a screen. They're sitting in front of me, and I see piece of Hank Brennan doing everything in his power to try to get this guy off his game. And once again and 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 again, Daniel Wolfe just answers the question. I mean, even when he brings up his wife, he just says, nope, I've never seen that before. Nope, I'm not bothered by, I'm not affected by my wife's opinions. It's like, and Hank just keeps on trying to bring in all this crap. It's just smoke and mirrors over and over and over again. And by the way, in case you missed it, do any of these questions have anything to do with John O'Keefe and whether or not he was hit by a car? Oh, no, not at all. Not even a little bit. And in the questions that are insinuating something about the testing, each time we find out on redirect that they were smoke and mirrors too.
Those clothes, are there holes or tears in the clothes?
Yes, there's damage that's consistent with road rash when clothing or a body makes contact with the pavement and is grinding into the pavement.
Pavement's hard. Right?
Yes.
How about frozen ground, frozen dirt?
Is that hard?
Yeah.
I suppose it can be.
Well, do you have any doubt whether frozen ground in the Northeast in the winter is hard as a rock?
I haven't done any analysis to assess that.
And so seeing holes in those clothes is what you would expect after Randy hits that hard ground, right?
Are you talking about frozen grass or pavement?
I'm talking about Randy right now. These holes in the clothes are what you would expect after Randy hits the hard ground, correct?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
I'm going to allow it, of course. This is absurd. It's absurd. Let's talk about this. It's an absurd insinuation because the entire body of this crash test dummy, the whole sweatshirt is filled with holes, and it's not the same kind of holes. Look at the hole. It's road rash. Did John O'Keefe have road rash? No. Did he have anything that even remotely looked like road rash? No. He had linear abrasions that looked like a cat, a very large cat, scratched his arm. Or a dog bit his arm right through his sweatshirt. And it's just so coincidental that there was a very large German Shepherd, one of the breeds most notorious for being aggressive, in the house. Are you kidding me with this garbage? It's just, again, you know, at a certain point, anybody defending these people, like, show yourself some respect. Please, just have a little self-respect. Because the fact that you can actually look at this information and think for 1 second that it is not suspect, that it is not just absolute BS, particularly when you consider the case that the Commonwealth put in front of us. My God. How could anybody in good conscience, who's being an honest person in any remote way, shape, or form, believe that the experiment, singular, by Judd Welcher is even comparable to what ARCCA is doing? How could you even compare the two? It is such a sham. What a disgrace. So what is the takeaway from today? Well, you had to be paying close attention, but here's one thing that we do know, and we don't know a lot about this jury. We know that they're younger than the last group. We know that, early on, they were emoting in some way that someone didn't want them to be, and so the judge asked them not to do that anymore. We know that there was one guy flirting with one girl, and ultimately that was off-putting because it seemed like they weren't taking it seriously enough or something like that in terms of how the judge at least was seeing things. But we also know that there's avid note takers, that one of the jurors has already asked for more than 4 notebooks. And that, to me, is an excellent sign, because it means that at least one person on that jury is trying to capture what is happening. And he's prioritizing, I think it's a he, is prioritizing capturing what is going on, right? So you've got a note taker on the jury. Who knows if they did that on purpose or not? I think that's awesome. I think that's probably one of the first things that I would have done if I was on a jury. I would have said, who's the best note taker? Let's make sure one of us has got everything or is working to capture as much of this as possible, right? Because you can't go back and look at notes, can't go back and look at transcripts. And think about how much information we've asked these 18 people to try to put into their heads and make sense of. And it is all coming at them so fast. I can only imagine what it must be like. And then they're being asked not to talk about any of it, which, by the way, is horrible. It's a horrible thing psychologically. People talk to process, right? It's like, even for me, when I'm working with clients, if I have colleagues, if I'm working in an office with other clinicians, it's better for me and for my clients because then I can talk through, not using names and personal information, disclosing information, but just to talk through a case oftentimes helps me to come to new ideas or to see things in a new way. And so it's part of the integration process for us as human beings. We need to think and talk with other human beings about what's going on. It is not healthy, in fact, to just regurgitate your own ideas and thoughts over and over again. That's actually a staple of mental illness, right? So, for example, think about what depression is. When someone gets depressed, they tend to withdraw from people more and more. They go up into their minds and they just recycle the same thoughts over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And so one of the things that we absolutely know about healing or overcoming mental health issues, right, to the best that all of us are able, depending on what the specifics of the mental health challenges are. But from a purely brain perspective, there are 4 fundamental factors of mental health, 4 things that are essentially the essence of what creates mental health at the physiological level. And those things are, number 1, mindfulness, developing an awareness of ourselves, understanding that we are not our thoughts, but we kind of sit behind our thoughts. And if we slow down, we can actually hear them and see them. And that helps in every way imaginable. The second thing is interaction with other human beings, right? We need to communicate. We need each other to survive, whether we like it or not. We are not meant to be isolated creatures. We are not meant to live on an island by ourselves. We need each other. And that is true for mental health, period. Number 3, novel information. We need new stuff, right? Again, regurgitating the same things all the time is not healthy because the way that the brain is organized, it is designed it's a use it or lose it system. So if there's no pressure put on that system because new things are introduced, then it doesn't need to work. And that's exactly what you don't want. Think about how your muscles operate, right? So what happens if you, for God forbid, are bedridden for a long period of time? You have to relearn how to use your muscles again, right? They atrophy. They stop working because your body is basically always making an adjustment based on what you're doing and how you're moving and who you're interacting with and how you're spending your time and your effort and your attention every day, right? So when you start doing things differently, then your brain makes a calculated shift in order to accommodate those changes. So pressure on the system is what creates positive change. Exposure to new information, new sensory information, new actual literal information, something new people, new places, new things. And then the last one is movement. And from a psychological perspective, movement is so important because the way that the body is organized, when we move, it actually triggers your brain to be alert to what's going on around you. So movement is an instrument that activates, generates, and helps to nurture learning. And learning is critical for mental health because, again, it's a use it or lose it system. If you put no pressure on the system, then it begins to atrophy. And that is the same no matter what part of your body you're talking about, including your big, beautiful brain. So use it, people. Use it. And if you're listening to me right now, you are doing a wonderful thing for not only your big, beautiful brain, but for your emotional and psychological health as well. Okay. So, what are the key takeaways from today? Well, I think if I'm that jury, the key takeaways are pretty straightforward. First and foremost, based on the puncture holes in John's sweatshirt didn't come from the taillight. And in fact, at the end of the day, thanks, of course, once again to Hank Brennan, we got an incredible redirect by Alan Jackson. And it couldn't be more clear from Mr. Dan Wolfe that it is not possible for those taillight pieces to be traveling faster, for the taillight pieces to break and then surpass the arm to then somehow make the marks, right? Make the marks or puncture the sweatshirt. And then in the experiments towards the end at the higher speeds, 24 and 29, I believe, where the crash test dummy skid along the road. Well, it skid behind the car, which we know obviously didn't happen here because number one, there was no road rash anywhere. But also, Hank Brennan tries to make it seem like the holes in the arm could have come from the road rash, but fails to have Dr. Wolfe point out that, well, no, not so fast, because there were also holes all over the rest of the body, all over the front of the sweatshirt, all over the left arm. So, no, sorry, you're wrong. And by the way, there was also road rash all over the crash test dummy. And the other thing that did not come out in Dan Wolfe's testimony, because he's not the biomechanics guy, right? So he's not going to talk about the anatomy of the body. We didn't learn from those little experiments what the damage to the arm was. We only got as far as to learn about the damage to the sweatshirt. So we're going to have to wait until Dr. Rentschler, probably Monday, to come and tell us about how these different tests ultimately affected John's body. And that's probably going to be the nail in the coffin, because I'm sure there were people, haters who support the Commonwealth, who were saying, well, yeah, but look, there was damage at 24 miles per hour to the taillight. So maybe if John was positioned in a certain way, it could have broke the taillight out completely, whatever. Well, there's a lot of issues with that, right? First and foremost, then there would have likely been all kinds of additional damage to other parts of the car that we didn't see, right? So that's a problem. Even when at 24 miles per hour, when the taillight was broke, it was not broken into 50 plus pieces. And in that instance, the top and side part wasn't broken, right? So it's like, this is really tricky. And while you might be able in your mind to say, well, yeah, but maybe at the right angle, you still saw zero damage to the sweatshirt, zero damage to the sweatshirt. And that really fails miserably to account for the terrible injuries, the parallel marks, the scratches or abrasions that are all over John's right arm. So, but the thing that killed me today, the thing that absolutely killed me today, I couldn't help but wonder if Hank Brennan was cross-examining Dr. Welcher's testimony. What a freaking field day Hank Brennan would have had with Dr. Welcher. I would actually pay to see Hank Brennan put together his cross-examination of Dr. Welcher's little fun with paint exercise. You talk about confirmation bias. Like, Hank, your entire case is confirmation bias. Everything you have presented has been painted with a full-blown bias, with absolutely no scientific evidence. And you're the one that got in front of the jury and said the science was on your side. And then you have the audacity to present two guys that are allegedly accident reconstructionists, who are the most obviously and blatantly paid to play hired guns a person could ever find in the world. One of them absolutely lies, bold-faced lies a number of times about his education, about his resume. And God help us, what was this guy thinking? Actually making himself available to testify in court, knowing that his resume is what? You know how many people that could ultimately have affected? Think about that. Let's say this guy puts together, 5 years of being a witness on different cases. This guy's a fraud. Are you kidding? Then Dr. Welcher presents himself like he's an upstanding person, tries to pass whatever nonsense that he was doing as experiments because he dressed up like John O'Keefe and painted the taillight and then fell into it and then said, oh, look, I created a pattern on my arm that could have been. That's what he told us. That is the extent of the proof, the science that Hank Brennan presented to us. Like, seriously. No, but like seriously. And all of the effort, this is something else, okay? It has not been proven yet to me that key cycle 1162 was Karen Reed on that night. So in the background, talking to people who have been so amazing to try to help me understand it, because I've been asking, and you guys all know that I'm crazy about the key cycles. I'm very, very grateful for those of you that have reached out to try to help me understand it. And lucky for me, there are people who are out there who are making sense of it. And the only sense that they can make is that it is very likely what happened was Trooper Paul messed up as to when he started testing with the car. And in the first trial, he tells us that he took possession of the car and testing at 1164. It turns out that is very unlikely. And it is only in that scenario that then key cycle 1162 could be these two trigger events and actually have them be Karen Reed using the car on that night. Now, that is not 100% proven. That is a very real possibility. But because telematics and infotainment data is not meant to be used to reconstruct accidents and used in a court of law to put a woman in jail, it's unusual and unorthodox to use the information this way. And so you've got a bunch of people who are not used to making all of this kinds of data, putting it all together to make sense of it the way we're trying. And that's what makes it impossible. That's what makes it unscientific, because it's not really ever been done before. And it's an unusual way to try to get at information. So that's the first thing. The first thing is we don't even know whether or not definitively Karen Reed on that night is responsible for key cycles 1162A and 1162B, the two trigger events, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and assume, just for the sake of this conversation, that it is. We'll just give them that. Okay, Shannon Burgess, that was your job, and you're alleging that, yes, this was Karen using the car at that key cycle. Well, even in that event, there was no accident registered to the car at that time or at any time. No airbag deployment, no emergency brakes, no slamming on the brakes, nothing to alert the car that a accident has occurred. Okay. So all that they have essentially proven, she had made a 3-point turn, which she admits completely, and that she backed the car up. But the problem with that information is that if you look really closely at the Burgess data, what he's actually using, and that Welcher then took and put in his report, there's some very shady details.
Okay, this is what he is claiming is 1162.1, which is the 3-point turn. He's claiming she was driving down the street at, 9 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour, turned in a driveway to do a standard 3-point turn. Mind you, this is in the snow on a street that she's never been down. It's dark. So she pulls in the driveway. He's saying that she pulls in, shifts it into reverse, and guns it 50% throttle backing out of a driveway, turning the steering wheel. Now, if she pulled in a driveway, right here's the 50% throttle. If she turned in a driveway, put it in reverse, and stabbed the throttle to back out while turning, her car would have spun around and probably have done a 180, at least a 90-degree turn, sliding, mind you. There's no way there was somebody pulling in a driveway to do a 3-point turn and use 50% throttle backing out. Now, if you remember, I said earlier about 1/10 of a mile. He doesn't list the 1/10 of a mile because there isn't one listed.
1162.1. The information in blue is speed. It comes out of the text stream in kilometers an hour, converted to miles per hour, feet per second, looked at the total distance traveled, shift position. So in the text stream data, a shift position of 1 indicates you're in drive. A shift position of 2 indicates you're in reverse.
There's no zeros. What would a zero indicate?
0 is usually neutral, and I believe 3 is park. So there's also data on the acceleration of the vehicle. So basically, what is the effect of whatever you're doing in terms of stepping on the gas or not stepping on the gas? And there's also information on the steering of the vehicle.
Now, what he has done to be deceptive is leave off the 1/10 of a mile, because she had to drive from where she did the 3-point turn to in front of 34 Fairview. From the point they pulled out of the 3-point turn to drive to the Albert's house is several 1/10 of a mile. So the odometer would have been changing. Of course, that didn't happen because the car was stationary in the driveway with only the tires spinning. And that is very deceptive and very dishonest. And we know why he did that, so this would fit the narrative. Furthermore, why would anybody back out of a driveway on a street they don't know, punch the throttle to 50%, which would have shot the car backwards while she was turning, so it probably would have spun around.
Is there something you can see on here that caused the triggering event, some of the data?
Yes. So if you look at the triggering, the indication of what this trigger was, what you see is accelerator opening ratio, which is basically, you can think of it as how much you're stepping on the gas pedal. And so if it exceeds, in this case, 30% quicken time after shipping into reverse, that tells the system, hey, we might need to start recording this data. So what you can see, it went into reverse, and then within a very short amount of time, the accelerator pedal went above that 30%. That's what caused the T or the trigger in the text stream data.
Row next to the 31.5, engine RPM data. Can you explain to us what that is?
Sure, that's how many revolutions per minute the engine's turning.
The more gas, is it generally the higher the RPM?
Correct. There's going to be a little lag. Your car doesn't move instantaneously. You have to step on the gas, then the RPMs go up, and then it starts going faster. Information, we get information on how far the vehicle's traveled. We've done it in terms of total travel distance. We've done it relative to the start position.
But he didn't put the real mileage down because the 1/10 of a mile would have changed several tenths because she drove from the 3-point turn to the Albert's house. This was all just smoke and mirrors. He took Burgess's data, made his own little graph or chart here, put some of his information in it, and is trying to put a woman in jail for the rest of her life over faulty data that he knows, he has to know that he's wrong and he's not telling the truth.
And that doesn't even consider the fact that Brian Higgins' Jeep is probably parked right behind Karen. So that there's no way she could have backed up 24 miles per hour the way that they're claiming that she did. Otherwise, there would have been damage to Brian Higgins' car. And by the way, I don't know if you've seen Turtle Boy's attempt to drive that route at 24 miles per hour. with a Lexus, not the same model, but a similar type of car, you can't do it. You can't drive a car at 24 miles per hour for 60 feet. It's like impossible to get the car moving that quickly at such a short distance. And he ends up over onto the grass because that, when you drive down 34 Fairview, and I saw this from my own experience driving down 34 Fairview, that house is actually on a curb. It's not a straight road, right? So right when you get to the flagpole, that right before that flagpole where that line of trees is, when you're coming down towards Fairview, it's like a little tiny, almost like a little hill. And then there's that, the flagpole is right at the beginning of a curve in the road. It's not a sharp curve, but it's enough of a curve that if you were traveling at 60 feet straight back, you'd end up like at the house. You'd end up on the lawn proper, up over onto the curb, onto the lawn. Because you would not be able to drive straight back and not be up on the lawn. So all of that is just not even really discussed in any of this. So this is not science. This is Hank Brennan coming up with theories and trying to hide the truth while also then carefully craft bringing in different bits of information to confirm his bias. That is by definition what Hank Brennan is doing. He is deliberately trying to tell us a story without a factual basis for it and is lying, hiding, cheating, and paying out of the taxpayer's pocket hundreds of thousands of dollars to find some group of jackasses to tell him whatever he wants to hear. And he just so happened to find the perfect group of jackasses to do that. Whether we're talking about Ian Whiffen, because make no mistake, Mr. Ian Whiffen is just as much a jackass, pay-to-play person as Shannon Burgess and Dr. Welcher. These people are disgusting. And the fact that the Commonwealth, this is their best effort to show us, to highlight to the world, not only to the jury, to the world, that Karen Read is guilty?
Dr. Welcher, let me ask you a question. When you're engaging in these demonstrations, are you attempting to try to show exactly how Mr. O'Keefe was struck?
No. So we don't know exactly how he was struck. And pedestrian impacts are extremely sensitive to exact angles. And so where exactly your foot is, whether your foot's off the ground, can have an effect on where you end up after that. We just don't have enough information in this case to determine all that information.
A clown who dressed up like John O'Keefe wasn't even wearing the sweatshirt when he fell into the taillight, never broke the taillight, never tried to break the taillight, never even considered presenting to us the speed at which the taillight would break. Nothing. Do you think any of these people understand what would happen if she was convicted? Do you know? Do you think that they actually think that would be good for them? The collective, the 85% of public opinion is so clearly able to see the bias, the corruption, and the evil attempts by the Commonwealth to obstruct justice. Everyone, from the district attorney to all of the Massachusetts State Police that work for the district attorney's office, to this horrible hack of a judge. This is how you're going to end the legacy of your storied career? This is it? Is what you're going to hang your hat on? Karen Reed case, Judge Bev? Corrupt because of her arrogance. Corrupt because she can't stand to have the hotshot LA lawyer and the big time New York attorney come in and tell her what to do and boss her around and wave their fingers at her. No one's going to do that to Miss Judge Bev. That, ladies and gentlemen, is low self-esteem. That's what happens when people are so desperately insecure that they have to overcompensate with a defensive exterior to offset how low of a person they feel inside when they're in the presence of strong, competent, and confident professionals like Alan Jackson and Robert Alessi. All right, that was a long one today. Thank you, everybody, so much from the bottom of my heart for all of your support, for staying with me throughout this video. Don't forget to hit the like button. And like all of you, I cannot wait to see how this all ends. And let's start our prayers now, because hopefully in a week, we are celebrating throughout the world, all of us having major parties and just beside ourselves, that Karen Reed is finally free.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything.